Hagen. Hagen used to chip. So one day I was taking the flying lessons, and as I sat on the floor of this little plane, I pulled the stick back, and the tail went down, and the plane took off. So something flashed into my mind. I said, maybe if I put a tail on a niblick, that'll take off too out of the sand. So I immediately went out to the hardware store and got all the solder, and I soldered the back of a niblick.
Before he died, Gene Sarazen revealed the 5 golfers he admired most. And what makes this list so powerful is that Sarazen didn't just watch these men play, he battled them. He beat some of them. He witnessed the entire evolution of professional golf across nearly a century. When Sarazen spoke about greatness, he spoke with authority that no one else could claim. This wasn't some commentator ranking players from a broadcast booth. This was the man who invented the sand wedge, who completed the first modern career Grand Slam, who stood on the same fairways as legends from the 1920s all the way through the 1990s. And in his final years, he gave us his verdict. 5 names, 5 titans who represented everything golf demands of a champion. But why does Sarazen's opinion matter more than anyone else's? Because he lived through it all. Born in 1902 and passing in 1999, Gene Sarazen witnessed every major shift in the sport. He competed with hickory-shafted clubs in the Roaring '20s. He invented equipment that changed the game forever. Standing just 5 feet 5 inches tall, he won 7 major championships through aggression and intelligence. When he turned professional, golf was a rich man's pastime where professionals were treated like second-class citizens. By the time he died, it was a global billion-dollar industry. Sarazen saw Bobby Jones dominate as an amateur. He watched Ben Hogan return from a near-fatal car crash. He witnessed Jack Nicklaus rewrite the record books. Every era of golf's history passed through Sarazen's eyes. So when he named his 5 most admired golfers, he was delivering a final verdict from the only man qualified to give one. Let me know in the comments which of these 5 golfers you think was the greatest. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into golf history, hit that subscribe button because we're just getting started. The first name on Sarazen's list was Walter Hagen. And this choice reveals something crucial about what Sarazen valued most. It wasn't just about winning, it was about dignity. When Sarazen turned professional in the early 1920s, professional golfers were forbidden from entering the clubhouses where they competed. They were entertainers, not equals. Walter Hagen refused to accept that treatment. At the 1920 Open Championship, when officials denied him access to the clubhouse, Hagen rented a Daimler limousine. He parked it right in front of the building and used it as his personal locker room, complete with a footman serving him meals. This wasn't just showmanship, this was warfare. Hagen forced the golf establishment to confront its own snobbery, and he did it with style. Sarazen watched this unfold and understood immediately. The respect he would eventually receive, the prize money he would compete for, existed because Hagen had fought for it first. Sarazen later said that Hagen contributed more to golf than any player ever. That wasn't hyperbole, that was gratitude. But Sarazen's admiration for Hagen went deeper than social justice. It was personal. At the 1922 U.S. Open, 20-year-old Sarazen chased down Hagen to win his first major championship. Hagen had dismissed him as just a kid, using calculated gamesmanship to try to rattle the young upstart. Sarazen admitted he didn't like being called kid. He was a champion and wanted to be treated like one. But that anger became fuel. Sarazen realized that to beat Hagen, he had to adopt Hagen's unshakable self-belief. The defining moment came at the 1923 PGA Championship Final. The match went to sudden death. On the 38th hole, Sarazen found himself in deep rough, while Hagen stood safely near the green. Hagen was already prepared to accept the trophy, but Sarazen struck a miraculous recovery shot and sank the putt to win. He took home the hardware, but he learned something more valuable. The game isn't over until the ball is in the hole. Hagen's refusal to yield, his ability to scramble from impossible positions, his demeanor that suggested victory even in defeat. These qualities became part of Sarazen's own approach. And then there was Hagen's understanding that golf was entertainment. His wardrobe of silk shirts, knickers, and 2-tone shoes drew crowds that generated revenue for the growing tour. Sarazen adopted this flair himself, wearing knickers long after they went out of style. He recognized that Hagen had written the playbook for the professional athlete. Be excellent, but above all, be interesting. The second name was Bobby Jones. If Hagen represented the professional fighter, Jones represented perfection. Jones was an amateur who played golf part-time while earning degrees in engineering, English literature, and law. To Sarazen, a man who had scraped for every dollar, Jones was an ideal that seemed almost untouchable. Sarazen said Jones was the greatest golfer who ever lived and probably ever would live. That statement carried weight because Sarazen didn't give praise easily. He meant it. Jones won 13 major championships in just 7 years of peak competition from 1923 to 1930. That level of dominance was a statistical anomaly that might never be repeated. And then, at age 28, Jones walked away. He retired at the height of his powers because championship golf had become like a cage. The expectation to win every time he played was crushing him. Sarazen admired Jones not just for the victories, but for the wisdom to leave. The relationship between Sarazen and Jones was cemented by Augusta National. When Jones founded the club and created the Masters tournament, he invited the top players of his era, including Sarazen, and it was at the 1935 Masters that their legacies became forever linked. Sarazen hit the most famous shot in golf history, a double eagle on the 15th hole that propelled him to victory. Jones witnessed that shot. Sarazen later said the aspect he cherished most was that both Walter Hagen and Bobby Jones saw it happen. To perform such a feat in front of the two men he admired most was the ultimate validation. Jones became more than a rival to Sarazen. He became the gold standard. While Hagen fought for the professionals, Jones elevated the entire sport. His sportsmanship, his intelligence, his dignity made golf feel noble. When he looked at Jones, he saw not just a champion, but an ambassador who proved golf could be art. The third name was Ben Hogan, and this choice reveals what Sarazen valued in a different way. Hogan was the worker. Sarazen and Hogan were similar physically, both smaller men who generated tremendous power, but temperamentally they were opposites. Sarazen was outgoing, Hogan was cold and introverted. Yet Sarazen placed Hogan in his top 5 because Hogan represented the triumph of will over everything else. Sarazen said no one covered the flag like Hogan. That was a statement about precision. Hogan's ball-striking accuracy remains the gold standard in golf history, but what Sarazen admired most was how Hogan achieved it. He dug it out of the dirt. Hogan didn't have natural ease. He wasn't blessed with Sam Snead's fluid swing or Bobby Jones's effortless brilliance. Hogan had to work for every inch of improvement, grinding through thousands of practice balls to find his secrets. Sarazen suggested that Hogan was jealous of players with natural talent. Not jealous in a bitter way, but jealous as a driving force. Hogan's work ethic was his response to not being born with gifts. The moment that defined Hogan for Sarazen was the comeback. In 1949, Hogan suffered a horrific car accident that nearly killed him and left his legs shattered. Doctors doubted he would walk normally again, let alone play championship golf, but Hogan returned to win the 1950 U.S. Open at Marion. Sarazen watched Hogan limp through 36 holes on the final day and still strike the ball with mechanical precision. For Sarazen, who valued mental fortitude above everything else, this was the supreme act of courage in golf history. It was proof that the mind controls the body. Sarazen had fought his way up from poverty and understood what it meant to refuse defeat. Watching Hogan do the same on a physical level resonated deeply. And then there was Hogan's 1953 season, the Triple Crown year. Hogan won the Masters, the U.S. Open, and the Open Championship, the only 3 majors he entered that year. Sarazen was particularly impressed by Hogan's victory at Carnoustie. Having won the Open Championship himself in 1932, Sarazen knew how difficult links golf was. He marveled that Hogan could adapt his game to the winds and unpredictable bounces of Scotland on his first and only attempt. The fourth name was Sam Snead. If Hogan was work, Snead was pure nature. Almost every expert of the era agreed that Snead had the most perfect swing in golf history. Sarazen said it was the best swing ever, noting the flowing power that never seemed to require effort. Snead's swing was rhythmic, smooth, and durable. It allowed him to compete at the highest level for over 4 decades. Sarazen famously said about a young Snead, "I've just watched a kid who doesn't know anything about playing golf, and I don't want to be around when he learns how." That quote captures everything Sarazen felt about Snead. He was a force of nature. Snead came from the backwoods of Virginia with a hillbilly persona, was completely authentic. He played by feel and instinct rather than mechanics and yardage. In an era where players were beginning to overanalyze the game, something Sarazen disliked, Snead remained a see-ball, hit-ball genius. Sarazen defended Snead against critics who mocked his simplicity, recognizing that it was actually his greatest weapon. When pressure mounted, Snead's intuitive approach kept him calm. Sarazen and Snead shared a bond as the grand old men of golf. Snead became the oldest player to win a PGA Tour event at age 52 and made the cut at the PGA Championship at 67. Sarazen made a hole-in-one at the Open Championship at 71. They proved that golf was a lifelong pursuit. Sarazen admired that Snead kept himself in incredible physical condition, maintaining flexibility that most men lost decades earlier. Snead never won the U.S. Open despite finishing second 4 times. But Sarazen didn't view this as a failure. He saw it with empathy, understanding the cruelty of the sport. Snead's 82 PGA Tour victories, a record tied only by Tiger Woods decades later, were proof enough of his greatness. The fifth and final name was Jack Nicklaus, and this choice is the most significant because it represents Sarazen's acceptance of evolution. Nicklaus was born in 1940 and emerged when Sarazen was already in his 60s. Sarazen watched Nicklaus dismantle the records that his generation had considered untouchable, and Sarazen's verdict was clear. He said he never thought anyone would ever put Hogan in the shadows, but Nicklaus did. This is a profound admission. For decades, Ben Hogan had been Sarazen's benchmark for ball striking and competitive excellence. To acknowledge that Nicklaus had surpassed Hogan was to acknowledge that the game had reached a level Sarazen himself never achieved. What fascinated Sarazen about Nicklaus was power. Nicklaus hit the ball higher and farther than anyone before him, making the ground game of earlier eras obsolete. Sarazen, the man who invented the sand wedge, respected innovation. He didn't resent Nicklaus for overpowering Augusta National. He admired the athleticism required to do it. Sarazen noted that Nicklaus changed golf from a game of style to a game of power. He saw Nicklaus as the prototype for the modern athlete golfer. When Nicklaus completed his career Grand Slam in 1966, he joined Sarazen, Hogan, and Gary Player in an exclusive club. Sarazen took immense pride in this fraternity. He viewed the Grand Slam as the ultimate test of a golfer's completeness. By winning on the links of Scotland, the clay of Augusta, and the firm fairways of the U.S. Open, Nicklaus proved he could master any condition. But it wasn't just physical dominance. Sarazen admired Nicklaus's mind. He saw in Nicklaus the same mental fortitude he had seen in Hagen, and the same grace he had seen in Jones. Nicklaus never complained about bad breaks or difficult setups. He simply beat them. And beyond golf, Sarazen appreciated that Nicklaus was a family man and a businessman who respected tradition while pushing boundaries. So what do these 5 choices tell us about Gene Sarazen? It revealed that he didn't just pick the players with the most wins. He picked men who represented distinct virtues. Hagen was the fighter who could win with his C game and dismantle opponents mentally. Jones was the ideal, combining technical perfection with moral authority. Hogan was the worker who overcame limitation through relentless effort. Snead was the natural whose intuition proved the body knows more than any textbook. And Nicklaus was the conqueror who synthesized power and intelligence to push golf beyond previous limits. Together, these 5 men formed Sarazen's definition of what the game requires. And notice who isn't on this list. Arnold Palmer brought golf to television and revitalized the Open Championship. But Sarazen perhaps saw Palmer's aggressive style as less complete than Nicklaus's dominance. Gary Player was a fellow career Grand Slam winner, but Sarazen likely viewed Hogan and Snead as the originators of trends that Player perfected. Byron Nelson's 11-win streak in 1945 was undeniable, but his early retirement meant he didn't have the longevity of the others. In his final years during the late 1990s, Sarazen was often interviewed as the last living link to golf's golden age. He was no longer protecting his ego as a competitor. He was a historian securing legacy. His insistence on these 5 names was a message to the modern world. Do not forget the foundation. In an era when Tiger Woods was emerging, Sarazen wanted to ensure that the mental fortitude of Hagen and the digging of Hogan weren't lost in the hype of the power game. Gene Sarazen died in 1999 at 97 years old. He lived through 18 U.S. presidents and witnessed every major champion from Harry Vardon to Tiger Woods. His selection of these 5 men stands as the ultimate verdict on 20th century golf. It balances art and science. It acknowledges the men who built the stage and the men who performed most brilliantly on it. But most importantly, it reveals Sarazen himself. He saw Hagen and saw the respect he craved. He saw Jones and saw the class he aspired to. He saw Hogan and saw the work ethic he valued. He saw Snead and saw the talent he envied. He saw Nicklaus and saw the future he helped build. Sarazen's list isn't just a ranking. It's a definition of what golf demands. To be admired by Sarazen, you had to do more than win. You had to endure, innovate, and honor the terrifying difficulty of the game with every swing. If Gene Sarazen were still alive today, who do you think he would add to this list? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this look into golf's greatest era moved you, subscribe because there are more untold stories waiting to be shared.